I'm Mike Skinner. I'm here as a traditional rawhide braider. I live in Kirkland, Washington, and have been doing this folk art for about 5 years. I got involved with it through the folk art group. I was initially introduced to it by an article that ran in the Alaska Airlines magazine about a braider who lives in Boise, Idaho. Made contact with him. His name's Steve Derricott, and he became my mentor through the Folks Art program, and we went through got a grant which gave us an opportunity to work together and develop the skills that I've got today. In terms of background, what originally got me started is my family has a cattle ranch in southeastern Oregon in a little town called Jordan Valley, and when I was little a lot of the hired hands would work with leather, braid, and do different things to augment their income, and I was always interested in it. Something I've always wanted to do since I was a little boy, and it took me 50 years to get around to it, but finally got the opportunity, and the state's been very helpful in providing me with some resources as well as the time to really focus on making this art come to life. Well, it's everything begins with a cow, so it starts with a cow hide, which in its finished form becomes a piece of rawhide. It's dehaired, and then I take it and run it through first a rounder, which cuts it into small strings, which this is called a tamale. It's a string of rawhide that's been cut down to size. It's also been narrowed so that it's not as thick, and then I take the edges off it because rawhide tends to be very sharp and would be hard on your hands. I then take that string, it's wetted, we put a combination of soap and glycerin on it to keep it wet as we braid, and then I actually make horse tack. So my primary focus is in and around all the things that you might use on a horse. So this happens to be a set of reins that started out first as a hide that moved to string, and then I braid it. This happens to be an 8-strand set of reins, and then I put decorative knots over the reins, which both give it a pleasant look as part of its objective, but it also provides some of the feel that a rider's looking for when they're using the items. A couple other things that I do. This is actually called a boselle, which is one of the items that particularly the traditional horse braiders would use when they were breaking horses before they moved them into a bit. And then from there I've also moved out and done a little bit of jewelry work. I do some stamping for shaps and wallets and different items, but my primary focus is in and around both reins as well as boselles and items that are used in the day-to-day activities of riding a horse. Creating a rein actually starts with a cord that's used to create a round feature of a set of reins. If you braid something greater than a 4-strand, so that'd be 4 strings, it'll flatten out without a core. So it's braided around a core. Then you take your strings, which we've started out in a tamale. You take those, wet them up, and then it's a pretty straightforward braiding process, similar to how you might braid someone's hair or a piece of nylon strand. Many of us, when we were getting into school, we had the nylon braids that we made keychains and key fobs out of. So that braiding process is pretty much the same. It could be anywhere. You can braid from as low as 4 strands all the way up. Some of the more intricate pieces will have 24 different strings that go into the braiding process. So you braid, typically braiding about 15 feet of round braid to start a set of reins, and that creates the rein portion of the reins. Then about an additional 4 set is used for the romale. The romale, you would know, as having slapper on the end of it, which is the history of this is it started out as a quirt. As it came into the America West, it was actually attached to the reins. The quirt was actually an item that was detachable. Once that's done, then the process moves to actually putting decorative buttons on. The decorative buttons itself, this is actually on a piece of wood for demonstration purposes, are built on top of a foundation. The foundation can be both rawhide or tape, and is done in again an over-under fashion. Many of the more decorative knots will actually, you'll hear terms of over 3, over 4. What that means is you're actually running the leather through 3 or 4 different passes to bring up a more decorative knot and also have a more raised look, similar to what we would see on the final set of reins, which has multiple buttons. So we've actually have between 20 and 25 buttons on a particular rein that give it both a look of both for decorative purposes, but it also provides some weight, both so the horse can feel the reins, but also so the rider can have good connection with the horse as it attaches to the bridle. So as we start the braiding process, we usually begin with a piece of leather. This happens to be a piece of Latigo leather. I've cut it into a round, and the leather cutter that I use happens to be a little bit unique in that it cuts the leather from the center out, which allows us to get more leather out of a piece of hide. The unit itself is relatively easy to use. We're working with a blade, so we're putting just a typical razor blade that you would use or be used to seeing around your house. The unit is, the leather then is placed into the actual cutter, tightened down, and then it's just a simple process really then of pulling the leather strap through the hide. A piece of about 12-inch round like this will generate between 30 and 40 feet depending on the width of the string that you've decided to choose that you would use. So once you've got that leather piece, then you're going to move to where you'll have multiple of them, and in this case I've actually have 6 strands that I'm braiding. The 6 strands are around a core, and it begins a pretty straightforward braiding process. In this case I'm going to go over one, under one, and over one, and continue until I've created a unit that, or a piece that is about 15 feet long, which will become the center part of my reins, and then the element that I'll then put my decorative buttons on. One of the other areas that we tend to get involved in when we do this is also stamping. Don't actually have stamps here with me, but what we're doing here is we're taking a piece of leather, wetting it, and then using hammer and stamps to actually create a decoration. First you carve it with a knife, so you're carving your outlining edges, and then you're using your stamps to actually bring to life the decoration of the particular unit. It is then dyed, tanned, and in this case I've actually put a braid around the edge of it to provide some additional decoration, and also it provides some strength as the item actually goes into use so that the edges don't wear down. And that's all, folks.